Welcome back to another MobileSentrix tips and tricks. My name is Derek, and today I'm going to show you something that I've had multiple requests, and that is how to reball a CPU. I know today's video is going to be very long, but it's going to be jam-packed of all the tips and tricks that I have earned over the last several years. Now quickly, here's what we'll be going over throughout this video. Removing the underfill, popping off the CPU, cleaning up the CPU and the board, reballing the CPU, and reinstalling it with all the little nuances that come along with that. So if reballing a CPU is something that you've been interested in doing, you're in the right place. Let's get into the video.
So what you can see if you look really carefully here, down here, is we've got some squeeze out. Okay, squeeze out happens when too much heat is applied to an underfilled chip. You can see the solder balls popping out here, right? It's a little bit more obvious when we look at it from the side. You can see the clear. Let's zoom out a little bit. You can see the solder balls, right, poking out. So what we need to do is, in this case, it's one of those circumstances where the only solution, or the only probable solution, is to pull the CPU and reball it. So what I'm going to do here is get in a position where we can do that. So I've got it clamped in. What we have around the border is underfill, and so we need to remove that first before we can start to slice through it. The main important thing is having the tools, having proper tools to work with. So for example, here I've got a razor blade and I've polished the edge of it. This is a scalpel, and I've polished the edge so it's rounded, kind of on the top, right, nice and sharp, has a nice fine point. But this back edge is polished so that if I find the right angle, I'm not going to cut into the board when I move along it. If I have it angled too high, it'll scrape. So I need to angle it so that when I go across it, it's not cutting into it. The other thing is I have this tool. I've also polished it. You can kind of see how like the very edge of the tool is slightly round. Okay, but they're sharp. They've got a little hook, and we can use this hook to hook the underfill. And then when it comes time to separate, I also have polished off the edge of this. And if we look at the edge of this tool, you can see that it's not sharp, so we're not going to be digging into anything. It is rounded on all sides down to almost a point, but not necessarily. And that point's in the middle, which means it's not going to be stabbing into anything. It's just going to be cutting through the underfill when the time comes to slide under the CPU. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our temperature of our rework station to around 300 degrees. You can do like 325 is where I like it for removing the underfill. And we're going to heat up the underfill, and we're going to remove it carefully without trying to scrape the board as we go through it. Now, one thing to note is just the orientation of the dot here. You can see the dot is in this corner here, right? We got the logo upside down, just so we can, not that it's hard to mess up the orientation, but just to kind of keep in mind the orientation of this chip when we pull it off. So we're going to take our airflow fairly low, and let's start at the top here. And I'm going to start using this tool here. And what we're going to do is carefully scrape at, we're going to carefully start to scrape at the top layer of the underfill. And we'll slowly work our way down to the actual motherboard. And we're going to do our best not to knock any of these resistors off the top edge of the CPU. just like that. Okay. And then we'll work our way down the side of the CPU here, doing the same thing. There won't be as much on this side, but we're going to remove it, whatever there is. Now, if I hadn't polished this tool, there's a good chance that it would be just scraping through that top black layer of the motherboard, causing potential places that solder can stick to down the road. So that's why it's important to hone in the tool that you're using just as much as you can. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is just so these components don't get lifted, because the underfill is stuck to the IC, to the CPU, and it will lift with it these components as it comes off, and soldering a bunch of these guys back on is no fun. Let's get a closer view. We'll zoom down in on there. And I'm going to switch over to the scalpel, just because it's a little bit more fine and it can get down into that area a little bit better. This side's a little thinner. I think there's not a lot of space here. Like almost every single one of these components is being touched by the scalpel, the edge of the scalpel as I go over it. So as long as we kind of get that seam cut, we should be good. Something that I recommend that you do is remove all the underfill between the little capacitors and resistors here along the side of the CPU. The underfill can expand and contract during the heating process and cause these components to float. Okay, so one thing we need to do is I'm going to change the nozzle to no longer have a reduction nozzle, because we want to really get the entire thing warm at the same time.
So one of the things that you might notice throughout this repair is I don't quite cover the temperatures. Now I can give you a range of temperatures that might work for you, but it really depends on your rework station, what type of output of air it can handle, and the actual temperature that it outputs, because each one will be different. So for example, if you're pulling an AND off of the motherboard, you might find that the temperature that your station requires is something like 380 degrees Celsius, where another station might require 400 or 420 or 50, maybe even 500. It depends on your station. So work with your station to find out the number that you need, because pulling a CPU, you might only need 400 degrees, you might need 450, you might need 500. It really depends on your station. And also when it comes to the airflow, some of the stations can put out a lot of air and some may not be as strong. So it really comes down to the station that you have. So test it out on a couple donor boards before working on a phone that matters. Back to the video.
Alright, and then you can feel it kind of start to slide in. Okay, when you start to feel it slide in, we're just going to keep the air moving. Okay, and we will push it through. and off like that. We've separated it without pulling any pads, basically, is the goal. And what's nice is, at least in this case, I can tell that we have very little underfill left. It means a little easier time reballing it. Okay, we've only got a little bit left. The black stuff, no missing pads, that's all good. We'll set this aside for a second and we're going to clean up the motherboard side of things. So in order to clean up the motherboard, we've got to get rid of all this underfill. And the first thing that I like to do is add some low melts to the pads to help protect them as we work through removing the underfill. So what we'll do is we're going to take some and we will put a little bit on the board. We'll take our soldering iron and we're going to move it around and mix it with the factory solder. Alright. And wherever there is not flux is going to be tricky, so we're going to add some extra flux. And we're going to add some more solder paste, and we're just going to keep going around until we've really thoroughly gone over every section of this area with the low melt. Try not to touch any of the resistors with it. And as we do this, it'll actually break up a lot of the underfill. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm kind of cutting through the underfill with the iron tip as we go, getting down to the board without scraping the pads off. Okay, now what we have as well is another tool that we're going to use. Okay, I've also done the same to this tip where I've polished off the tip, and we're going to use it to kind of scrape at the remaining underfill. So we're going to take our hot air rework station. We're going to lower the airflow. We'll lower the temperature a little bit, and what we'll do is we'll carefully work this blade around. You can see the solder starts to melt. You can really see the underfill, how thick the underfill gets right there. Okay, we've got the majority of it up now. What we're going to do is we're going to wick off the rest, and that'll help clean it up as well. So we're going to add more flux, come in with a little bit more solder paste just to go around it one more time with the iron, then we'll wick it up. Okay, now we'll take some wick, fold over the edge of it just a little bit. And we'll drag it around and try to get nice and flat pads. Now we're not scraping at the board because we don't want to remove any of the top coat, the black stuff. We don't want to start to remove any of it. That would create issues, especially here in the middle, depending on the version, depending on the generation of iPhone. You can really easily scrape through that and start to connect these pads, and a lot of them are grounder pads, and they will do that. You just want to avoid scraping any of the black top coat off the motherboard. We'll get some new wick. It's starting to get a little full. Bend it over again. You can see I missed a little underfill here, so we're just going to kind of scrape at it. Just like that. Watching out for all of the pads, just making sure that we're getting all of the solder off of them. It's okay if a little bit gets left behind, like you can see on some of these. We got little remnants of little puddles, but nothing that's beaded up. We don't want to have a high point, so we want to really get rid of anything that has too much solder on it. Now we'll flip this around so that we can have a just more comfortable access to this area because it's on the bottom side. We'll trim up our wick again. I'm going to add a little bit more flex, and we'll come in again, the iron, Alright, and then what we'll do is we'll come in with some isopropyl alcohol, and I've got here a microfiber cloth. And one of the reasons I do this is so that the so the brush doesn't get saturated with flux. Alright, so we're just getting the microfiber cloth saturated with the burnt flux. You see it changes into that yellow color. Alright, now we're to a point where I'm okay to visually see where else we need to go, so I'm just going to use the brush to remove any of the little last stuff. Alright, now we got a little bit more than I'd like to see of underfill here on the top, just a little bit. And one more thing that we're going to do is we're going to clear out each one of these bigger squares. So what I'll show you how we're going to do that. I'm going to take the same tool that we were using to remove the underfill, the same chisel blade. I'll clean off all of the flux and debris on it. We're going to install a reducing nozzle on our rework station. And what we'll do is first I'm going to just clear this top section of the remaining underfill that's just barely poking out on this side of all of those components. Not that I think it's going to be in the way, I think it won't be in the way, but I'm just really we're going to do all this work, we might as well make sure that we're guaranteed to have nothing that's going to lift the CPU at all. And then what I'll do is we'll zoom down in on here. Alright, so this is all flush, okay? But I wanna remove this underfill. There's still underfill that's here. And let me just show you what we're talking about. So right in here, if I carefully dig at it, you'll see that there's a layer of underfill. It's not a big layer. And we'll do that on each one of these little squares. You can see these ones have been cleared. Those ones don't have any, but this one still does. And the last two here. Okay, now this area is completely clean and ready for to receive the CPU. There's nothing in the way, no pads are missing. If a pad gets pulled during this process, most of the time it's not important. Most of the time if a pad gets pulled, it's going to be a blue pad, a no stuff pad. I exposed a teeny amount of trace there, so just to be safe, we're going to cover it up. It's probably all ground. We can actually check and see if it's ground. So we really don't need a lot at all. Like that's enough. We just need to spread it out a little bit more. Just like that. And then we'll cure that with the UV light. And while we let that cure, let's take a look at the CPU. Alright, to clean this up, we're going to do the same thing. Put it under a little bit of clamping pressure just so it doesn't want to run away on us. I'm going to take some 138 solder paste. Alright, and if these little icy looking things come off, that's fine. They're capacitors. I like to leave them, obviously, especially if I'm going for full functionality. Yeah, you can remove all of them if you really want to. But I only do that. I only remove them if I'm doing, or I don't worry about them if I'm doing like just a data recovery. If I'm doing functionality, then I leave them. Now, one thing I'm definitely not going to do is scrape down on the CPU because there's this orange coating that I like to leave. Okay, we don't want to remove the orange coating that's on top. So I'm just literally skating this across the top, kind of working at that underfill a little bit, but I'm really not trying to scrape at all the logic board here. Like I'm almost just letting the solder droop down and suck up the solder that's on the board. I'm not even like touching the board with the soldering iron unless I have to, which you don't really have to in most cases. As you can see, the underfill here, It almost just like comes off when I just skim the iron on top of it. As you can see, wherever I have flux, you see over here it doesn't stay on the iron because there's no flux there. So what we'll do is we'll add some flux around the perimeter, just like that. And then when I go around to watch what happens to the solder here, it's just gonna beat up on the iron tip, and it'll suck up all of the solder that's left behind on the CPU. Okay, there's a couple on the edge here that have become gray. We'll dive down into those in a second. That might be where the squeeze out occurred and caused no power, no function. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not looking to touch the CPU in this right now. I'm not looking to touch it at all with the iron tip. I'm just letting the solder and flux work on it. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more serious and start to get rid of all of the underfill. Alright, I'm just going to skate the iron on the surface, not scraping the orange off. Just kind of nudging the underfill off. It really just a patience game. Alright, let's zoom down on this corner just so you guys can see the gray pads that I'm talking about. No, they're not as gray anymore. But the four on the left side there were really kind of starting to get gray. You can see that top corner one is still somewhat gray. And adding flux and taking the iron to it is going to get rid of the oxidation on them and going to bring them back to life. You can see it's not wanting to accept the solder as easy. There, now they are. Now they're all taking solder. So we're just going to move around nice and slowly, getting rid of, just nudging all the underfill, making sure none of it's staying down, none of it's stuck anywhere. I'm assuming I'm going to miss something because we're probably going to have to come back at it one more time after we clean it, because there's going to be something that I thought I'd moved without moving it. Again, I'm not pushing hard at all. I really don't want to scrape through the orange layer. Then I'll start to create bridges and it might kill the CPU for good. Okay, so we're at a point now where I think we can try to clean it up as far as taking alcohol to it. We're just going to take this big solder here. We're going to suck it up. We're going to go around one more time. Alright, now we'll take some isopropyl alcohol and we're going to put down our microfiber cloth and we're going to gently wipe away the flux and whatever else wants to come with it. We'll blow that off. Alright, now we're going to flux it up one last time before cleaning and reballing it. We'll get our wick. We'll take the wick, warm it up, and carefully move it along the edge, getting rid of all of that solder. And you can see it really kind of cleans up the flux as well, cleans up the underfill, pushes it out of the way. Okay, we are almost there. There's a couple more to clean up. Now we don't have to remove them. Again, we don't have to remove them perfectly. It does help to have like no solder on there at all, just so you get really even solder balls. But the amount of solder that's left on these, plus what will actually fit inside the stencil, kind of equals out over, you know, on that, over that distance. But, you know, again, taking your time to remove all of the solder is going to help in the long run. Alright, one thing to note, never lift up the wick without lifting up the iron at the same time. Like if you leave the wick down and you lift up the iron, you could potentially pull the pads, because what will happen is the solder will cool down and stick the wick to the CPU, and then it'll yank the pad off. Because they're so small, they're really not that strong, really weak. I think we're at a point where we can now clean it. So let's take a look at this guy. Add some isopropyl alcohol. Alright, that half is clear. Now you can see there's a couple with a teeny amount of solder. There's those two down there, that one in the middle there. But those are so small amounts that I'm not going to worry about trying to nitpick that much. We've already been nitpicky enough. Now, if you really want to, you could spend the time to kind of just shave off the edges. Anytime there's a little bit of underfill on the edge, you just take your razor blade to it. Okay. And there's a little something here on the corner. Gently. There you can see what I'm referring to. There's this little amount of an underfill here, so I'm just going to carefully scrape at it. It's probably nothing that would get in the way of having a solid solder job, but when you come this far, the last thing you want to do is have to do it all over again. One last spritz of the alcohol. Alright, now we'll get out our reballing stencil. Here we go. Everything lined up pretty much dead on. Now we're going to come in with some 217 solder paste. Okay, the big boy, the heavy stuff. Needs more heat to get it to connect, but you could go with like a 183 if you wanted to. But because we're not doing this for just a data recovery, we're going to stick to the high temperatures here. Okay, we're going to dry out we're going to smear it into a microfiber cloth to help kind of dry out some of the flux. And then we're going to go back in and pick up what it wants to pick up off of there, like that. And then we're going to push it down into the stencil. And we'll take our time just going over this, making sure that we're not shifting the stencil around too much and that it's constantly being compressed. We don't want solder to kind of slip under the stencil in any way. We want it to only get down into the holes. I'll tell you this, having to reball a CPU a second time, not fun. It's not the end of the world, it's just, it's a lot of work. So you have to go wick everything off again. And I'm just going to go over it. We're going to kind of remove as much of the paste as we can just with our tool here. Things might still want to shift around, so we're definitely going to be still putting some pressure down when we go to heat this up. So take our temperature up to about 400. Actually, before I do that, one thing I forgot to do, I like to dry it off one more time. So just gonna find a clean area of the microfiber cloth. Okay. And this does two things. It dries it off one more time, but it also kind of pushes the solder down against the CPU itself so that it wants to make better contact. So we're now going to pin it down and slowly heat it up. I like to move it as I go, just to keep the stencil from lifting. Luckily this stencil holder, although it is warping. Alright, everything looks good except for this top corner. Kind of a little weird, so we're going to add some flux to it. Where is the flux? Okay, we're going to add some flux to it. Alright, just looking at it, I don't see any area of huge concern. Actually, there's one little... No, that's good. Let's see. Yeah, everything looks good here. I add a little bit more flux everywhere. And we're going to heat this up again to help release the stencil. Okay. Now the stencil's off. Okay. And there's just a couple little areas here where we're just going to go in and hit it again with the air and get the solder to reformulate or reform into... Oh! That's okay. We can fix that. Now, we got to fix this joint right here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take the scalpel here. Alright, we're going to create enough of a separation between them that they're equal. Like the amount of solder that I cut on both sides is the same. We're going to take a hot air again at it. This time keeping the scalpel in between them, so that we have a wall there between them. Just like that. Okay. So we're going to heat it up one more time just to make sure that they separate a little bit more. There. Okay, and then that all looks really good. Okay, so we're just going to go over it one more time, make sure there's nothing in the way. There's no weirdness going on. Yep, it looks all really solid. Alright, so there we go, perfect solder balls. Alright, we'll zoom down in on that area. Now we can just carefully remove any of the UV mask that got on top of this joint and this one. Okay, and everything else looks solid. No bridging, nothing we have to fix. I scraped the board a teeny bit there, but nothing that's exposing anything. And also right there, but nothing that's exposing anything. We got rid of all of the underfill around the border and under it, so there's nothing that's going to prevent this chip from sitting properly. Alright, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to warm up the board a little bit. We're going to preheat it just a little bit, partly to make sure we get our flux as thin as possible. So what we'll do is I'm going to heat up the area, and then we're going to take the flux and then we're going to drag it around. That way we're not using too much flux. But we want every joint covered, otherwise it could potentially oxidize while we heat it up and then the solder won't stick. I mean, that's very unlikely given how much preparation we've put into this that happens, but something to just keep in mind. I don't see any spot that's dry.
Yeah. Everything
looks like it's got a layer of flux on it. Getting the orientation of the chip is wrong is really hard because we have the IC, we have the capacitors to kind of tell us, hey, we've got to put things on this way. Well, we flipped the board around once, now everything's upright. This is the right way because we flipped it around one time. Yeah. And we just checked with the capacitors as well. Okay. Now, if you notice, it was, so the bottom side is now the top side, and we were having a hard time scraping in between the components there. So we know that that's lined up because we've got a decent space down here to clear it. Okay. So, one thing you can do if you really want to is now that that flux is kind of cooled down, it's creating a surface tension, which means this chip isn't just going to fall off if we turn it sideways a little bit. But what you can do before you solder it, this is something that's kind of cool to see, is you can actually double check the alignment by looking at the side of it. So you can see how they're literally perfect on top, kissing the joints. Alright, so when this goes to settle in, it should just settle straight down and almost have no wiggle or wobble at all. Okay, we'll slowly heat this up until we can give it a nudge. And what we'll see probably before anything happens is a drop in the CPU. It should drop a little bit, and we'll see kind of the flux come out of the sides. It'll kind of puddle up around the edge once it drops. See how it's starting to puddle around the edge just a little bit? Like that. Okay, we're going to give it a nudge. Oh, I saw it move, and there it dropped a little bit. So now we're going to give it a nudge. And it snapped back. Give it a nudge on this side. And it snapped back. We'll take the heat away and let it cool down by itself. So that's probably cold enough that the solder is settled. So let's take it off and take a look at the side and see if we can see how well those joints went. Zoom down in and on there. And we're making connection, but I don't like all of them. So right here you can see there's 3 solder joints that are making good connection. You see them? Yeah, but the others aren't. They're still balls. They're not stretched out or pancaked. So if we look down here, these are all nice and solid right here. Then we get towards the top and they start to, we lose 2 right there. Right? And we lose 2 there, and then we lose all of these. Okay. And then on this side, those are all, let's see, these ones are good. Those ones are starting to pull up and pull away. And then towards the top, we've got some separation. So good thing we looked at this. Let's go and hit it one more time with heat and get this thing to sit a little bit nicer on the motherboard. And this time I'm going to focus my heat around the top because we know that area wasn't sitting all the way. We're going to turn the airflow up more this time. We're going to move the air a bit. Alright, let's see if all those nudging and extra heat did it this time. Okay, now let's zoom down in on there and see this time what we've got going on. There we go. Okay, this is exactly what we're looking for. You can see we've got uniform solder joints all the way across that side. Let's flip it on this side. And we've got uniform solder joints going across this side.
So there you go. I know it was a long video. Hopefully you'll last through to the end. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If there's anything that you'd like to see demonstrated in a future video, leave it in the comments below as well. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll see you in the next video.